Well, it is good to talk to everybody today. It's been, I know when people are just coming in, we're getting set up. I was just reflecting on how quickly it has gone by that I've graduated in 2016, but it feels like it was like seriously maybe a year or two ago. I can't believe it's already been like 5 or 6 years at this point. So crazy to be looking back and talking to you guys. But I guess overall, just before we go into anything, I have some slides about myself, about VMware, about what I do, about how I got there. And then I also, the general theme, I have some information around data security and cybersecurity and some of the current trends as that relates directly to what I do. But that being said, also want to be as useful or use this time as best we can. So if there's questions or if people have other things that they wanted to bring up and talk about, definitely feel free to jump in and derail, because if you have questions, I would much rather talk about those rather than just go through what I have created, because what I've created is meant to generate questions, not just talk about it. So, that being said, I'll do a quick intro here. So overall, we'll go through a little bit of just an intro to myself, a brief introduction into the data security ecosystem and some of the main fundamentals and main themes that you'll see in a lot of your courses throughout your time at Bentley, all the way from IT 101 up to whatever course. That doesn't even have to be a CIS course. There's just a lot of themes that are I come across every single day at this point. Maybe I didn't realize I was coming across them every single day, but accumulating through the last couple of years, you start to see that, I mean, everything is really interconnected. So just because you don't think it's going to matter now, it certainly might come back up in a different form much later on. We'll go through a case study. I tried to take a little bit of a different approach here. So it's a parody case study. I figured I have a better chance of helping people remember a few examples if I make it about something that people have a lot of familiarity with versus something you may not. So hopefully that's helpful. And then also, I know a lot of my initial questions that I had when I was going through internships and trying to figure out where my first job was going to be, I would always ask, what can I be doing? Like, what books can I read? What websites can I check out? What resources are out there? Obviously, the coursework and the professors at Bentley are very good at putting those resources together for you. But of course, that's just the beginning of, once you leave Bentley, you don't have direct access to all those resources anymore. So I put together a few of the ones that have been helpful for me since leaving Bentley. So I'm Jake Barosin. I'm from Georgetown, Massachusetts. I recently moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. It's been about 7 months. It's been great. I am a huge bandwagon Charlotte Hornets fan. It's the perfect time to jump on the bandwagon. There's no one else there, so it's completely empty. You get a front row seat. But in all seriousness, it's a fun city. It's been a good time down here, and yeah, I'm definitely still excited to come back up and visit Boston. So for the purposes of time, I just combined my Bentley experience and work experience, but to start with just the initial piece where I was still at Bentley and some of the pieces that I felt were impactful to me at Bentley. I had an internship my junior year at Brown Brothers Harriman, which is a bank. I think there was a couple of other people who had came and talked to the sandbox, and I saw a couple of other themes that I thought was funny, because that I also kind of resonated with, which was I wanted to find a place that was super secure, which from a job security standpoint, I was thinking, where's a place that I'll have the ability to like grow and learn and has a good education system internally. And banks tend to offer a lot of good systems for those things. I ended up in security, not the security of a bank, but cybersecurity. So kind of drew a little dotted line there, but that was a very cool experience. A lot of great people. Yeah. So from a experience, interaction, or activities at Bentley, obviously you guys are all in the sandbox right now. That's a great experience. I'm glad that you're all doing it, and I hope, I mean, it looks like it's trending upwards. I hope that keeps going for indefinitely, but that was definitely just one of the experiences I had at Bentley that were impactful. I was also an RA. I worked in the admissions office. Then I also worked at a restaurant for a decent amount of my junior and senior year. And then study abroad was also a really, really impactful experience that I had. I did semester at sea if people are still seeing their friends or have done that themselves. Has anyone studied abroad already or planning to?
Well,
Well, yeah, Albert and Chem
well,
kind of.
yeah, I'm international, so I guess it's study abroad. I mean, that's the
You're
level
doing
that.
it. You're doing it
Yeah, I
live.
don't need a second layer of it, but yeah, definitely one is enough in that sense. Yeah,
Fair enough. Where are you from?
I'm from Turkey, so pretty far away. So yeah.
Wow, awesome, very cool. Yeah, so these are just a quick, I guess it's tough to put it all into just a few bullets, but these are the ones that I came up with. I did have a major in CIS. I also did a minor in management and psychology. So kind of a little bit of a smorgasbord of courses towards the end there, but it added up to kind of a mindset of, I knew I liked technology already. Part of the reason I knew I liked tech was my favorite classes were CS 240 and CS 350 for very different reasons. I really like CS 240, and I was looking at some of the other conversations that former tutors were going through, and I think the CS 240 course is a really good example of when it comes to like how close can you get to the fundamentals. And if you like that, then I at least for me, I found that that's what resonated with me most. From that jumping off point, it was cool. I really like the fundamentals. Like there's so many other business processes and abstractions of new technology that go on top of these fundamentals. And that's really what I'll be talking about today, is how those all get abstracted in different ways. But CS 240 was kind of the start of that. And I thought that course was, if you haven't taken it, it was definitely the more difficult course, or one of the most, if not the most difficult course to take at Bentley, but super valuable. I still have the study guides from those tests as well. And then CS 350 was more of an appreciation type of course where I don't personally do like database design. And if I recall correctly, that was a lot of what the theme was there, of actually doing the planning and the creation of the architecture of what a system would be like. And that definitely gave me an appreciation for what a lot of dev teams and security operations teams are dealing with now, and just the massive amounts of complexity in these huge legacy organizations where I could barely do it from a clean slate, where I had full control, and now they're working in these huge monolithic organizations, which I don't know, I think it's just really a testament to how smart a lot of these people are that work in data security and cybersecurity, that they still can get their jobs done. After Bentley, so I started at a company called Bit9 plus Carbon Black. It was an endpoint security company at that time. It was originally founded in 2003, so it had been around a while before that. Originally started as an app whitelisting company, which when it comes to the goals of security and the ways to get there, most of the time the goal of security is be the most secure that you can. And app whitelisting is kind of one of those approaches where everyone kind of agrees that that is one of the, if not the best way to get there from an endpoint stance. Because what that means is you can just define what's supposed to run on a user's computer. Anything that's not in that list of definitions of specific types of processes, specific types of applications, it just won't be able to execute. So from a cybersecurity standpoint, that was kind of like the holy grail for a lot of teams. So that was a really cool place to start. We got acquired by, or excuse me, we went public in 2018 as Carbon Black, and then got acquired by VMware in 2019, and now kind of went through the name shaking up of the pluses and minuses, and now we're VMware Carbon Black. So still some commonality from the beginning there, but it's gone through a few changes. I was a sales engineer, or a solutions engineer, as you'll see in some different organizations, for the first 4 years or so. And for the last year and a half or so, I've been a commercial solutions architect for the inside sales and global sales engineering teams. So I know that was a fairly quick overview of just who I am and where I came from, but any questions on that so far? Anything at all? Cool. So VMware is kind of one of those companies where I think a lot of people either know they know it, or don't know they know it, or are like using something every day and then they realize, oh yeah, like this is running on VMware. So it's kind of one of those that definitely has its influences in so many places. And for those who are familiar, it's been around from I believe the late 90s or early 90s. Apologies, I don't know the exact date there, but the goal throughout and up to this date, it has been really focusing on how to virtualize all the components of a data center. So if you think about these businesses that have however many numbers of systems that they need to be successful with their goals, and instead of having 10% of each of those hardware servers actually being utilized, VMware helps define a software-defined data center where all those resources can be configured and managed as software. So that helps with optimization, that helps with cost, that helps with just overall management of hardware because you're managing less hardware, and it gives a lot more control to the organizations themselves. That is a very, very broad description of what VMware does. There's much more, and especially with the changes that are happening into the future, there's been a large focus of organizations to start to leverage things like additional functionality and benefits of moving more of their resources to the cloud. A lot of the times people will just move their existing servers and VMs from a local data center to some cloud provider, and that's like a rip, and I forget the term there, but like they're not actually changing anything about how the infrastructure works. They're just changing where it's working from. And that is one change. I mean, that can still be beneficial for some reasons, but a lot of the other purposes of teams moving to the cloud and what VMware focuses on is benefiting from what the cloud can provide. So elasticity, advantages of microservices, being able to be more distributed, all those are things that, depending on the size of the business, could be very much so a focus moving forward. A lot of the times organizations have had these as goals for a while. Now they're just starting to execute, but it will certainly be interesting to see how the adoption goes there. So I work specifically for VMware Carbon Black. I know that's confusing because it's like VMware Carbon Black, but VMware is a big company. But to get a little bit more specific, to give you a mindset of kind of where I come from and if it's interesting, or it might be interesting to you, I work for the organizational unit that focuses on security. So specifically endpoint security, that's desktops, that's laptops, that's servers, that's clusters. Clusters is a more recent addition to the portfolio. But as an SE, what I did for the first 4 years and the day-to-day there was very much so focused on interacting and working with prospective customers, as well as sometimes customer conversations and engagements when they're looking to, whether it's modify or add on different types of security solutions to their existing Carbon Black tool set. So a lot of that is you, a sales rep, and a member of a external team. Very candid discussions a lot of the time. You're looked at as the security practitioner. They're looking to you for knowledge and information about how to best use not only the Carbon Black tools, but how to best secure their environment. So it is both a giving security advice and being a practitioner role, but it's also helping your sales rep and understanding that from a timing perspective, a deal perspective, there's a lot of other resources that you can provide as an SE, being both S and E, not just an engineer, to help a deal close. And one of the sayings that you'll hear a lot is time kills all deals. So as an SE, your goal is help people validate and prove what they need to with the technology, but do it expeditiously. Don't just do it and take forever, because inevitably something will happen. Someone pushes an update and there's a change control window that they can't do anything for 6 months, and all of a sudden that deal is pushed 2 quarters down the road and no one wants that. So there's a lot to go into the SE mindset, but in short, it's SE, sales engineer, meaning there's a combination of both. Becoming an SA was really fun and very, very much so a path that I did want to take. What that's turned into is very much so a focus on enabling SEs. So as an SE, you do a lot with your reps, and you do a lot of call discussions and just debriefing of, here's a customer environment, here's what their operating system breakdown looks like, here's what their tool sets are existing today. Let's present to them and figure out how they can use our tools to be more successful. And SA is more, how do I make SEs more easily enabled to do that quicker, faster, easier? So a lot more working with some of our integrations teams and working with some of our product teams. So been a welcome change from the sales mentality. All right. A few traits, and I know this is just from my perspective, but when it comes to like looking at careers and looking at things that you can do after Bentley, SEs and SAs, I think in general have a lot of similarities, but when it comes to the things that I've seen in my peers and other SEs that I've worked with, these are several of the traits that I found to be common amongst the really good ones. A lot of these are obvious, but the one I wanted to call out was the time management piece and ability to gracefully say no. if there is one thing that sales reps like, it's the ability to say yes. And when it comes to tech can't always do what everyone wants it to do. There's very real limitations. And the SE's job is to help sales reps navigate that type of situation where no isn't like a no, I don't want to help you. It's a let's evaluate the question. Is this a legitimate question? Let's figure out if it is technically possible and we should do it right now. If it's technically possible, but here's why. Here's additional resources that I can give to you that you can use to validate without having to do it yourself and take extra time to do it yourself. Or here's information about why it's not possible today, potentially some mitigating workarounds or other solutions that can help them. So that's definitely a common trait of the SE, is kind of finding a path. You're still trying to find a solution, even if the answer isn't a de facto yes. Also, lastly, being able to communicate to a day-to-day operator, so someone who's all the way down in the weeds, working with the tools day to day, and then being able to kind of shift gears fairly quickly to be able to discuss something, the same tools and the same value proposition with their management, potentially all the way up to C-level executives. That's kind of like a regular SE agenda. You might have one call that you're talking to a C-level person, and the next call you're jumping on and going very much through a specific set of operations with the tool. So a lot of gear shifting during the days there. These are a few other like lesser common things, but passion for technology is kind of an obvious one, but it's not obvious in the sense that everyone in the CS sandbox, you have a passion for technology. It might not all be the same type of passion, but what I mean here is being able to also show that you have passion for what you're talking about. I mean, I'm sure I've talked to some engineers out there that even though like this is like their life and they love it and they're so good at it, like you don't hear it in their voice and they don't show it in their mannerisms. And that's a big difference, or that can be and make a big difference when you're talking to a prospective customer, because when it comes to being able to show value and show that with your solution or with the solution that you're proposing, like they are going to be comfortable and they're going to be able to do their job, that takes positioning and confidence. If you're kind of wishy-washy and doing the like upspeak at the end with the questions every time, like that tends to be kind of one of those things where you kind of have to be aware of both the passion that you're showing and also just in general how you're presenting the information. Any questions on those pieces for like the role in general?
I'm muted. I'm muted. Okay. Which of those skills do you think you learned on the job?
I think a lot of the time management and the ability to say no was learned from watching more senior and other members of my team. So that was definitely one where knowing the fundamentals of how the tool works, knowing the fundamentals of just the deal cycle, those are easy to kind of conceptualize, and you have the checklist of what has to happen. But being able to interject, and even though there may be part of you that wants to say yes, knowing that saying no and gracefully positioning a solution that is more focused on still getting them to the end resolution, but doing it with less risk and will take less time. That's something that is definitely still a work in progress. I mean, that's every single day. If I'm talking to people, depending on the question, it's always easy to just default to yes, or like, yeah, we'll figure it out. But there's times where being able to say no it's better for all parties, but it takes more effort and energy in the moment to be able to position that type of solution. Yeah, that's definitely one that has taken a while to hone.
Okay, go.
All right. So to go a little bit more into the cybersecurity piece of it, and I was trying to figure out a good place to start. So I think just in general, an overview of some of the trends that I've noticed, and some of these are just observations from my day-to-day work, but also looking at other resources that are out there. But from the top down, there's so many places and new emerging spaces in both IoT and just the cloud computing and the internet in general. So definitely a space where if you welcome change and you're ready to be out of date a day late, or from one day you're up to date and the next day there's already a new patch and there's already something that's been pushed and an update. that is definitely all things cloud and all things cybersecurity. It's always trying to keep up with whatever is the newest bleeding edge. The next one is more specific to the types of threat actors that exist in the world. And I was going to spend a little bit more time talking about that because I think that's a theme that goes underemphasized in the conversations and the news articles that we see about cybersecurity events. And that is that most threat actors are still opportunistic, meaning they're looking at low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of situations out there where it's really the fundamentals that are going to help people the most. Yeah, there's like the glorified, like Mission Impossible style events that still happen, and we'll talk about that. But most of the time, it's opportunistic. Some of the other ones are more just like call outs of some of the things I've noticed in my role. That being, companies are all at different stages. It's not like everyone. Sometimes you feel like if you're trying to compare yourself to peers or to companies trying to compare themselves to other companies, like you can only compare yourself to where you're at, and all companies are at a different stage. And then cloud computing and monitoring and securing cloud resources is a huge trend. I think that's been a trend that has come up in several other discussions as well. And then patch your stuff. I know that doesn't necessarily make sense without more context. So I'll just say from a vulnerability perspective, a huge theme in cybersecurity is people want to know, like, how do I stop this exploit? Or how do I like do this like crazy thing to like make sure I'm not vulnerable? Like the answer is almost always like, you should patch. And if you can't patch, like, let's figure out why you can't patch. It's a lot easier said than done, but first and foremost, that is the main goal and still is. So this is my attempt at summarizing a few places of where to begin. And I figured one place of where to try to begin this type of conversation around data security is what is need in general. And I'm not sure if people have come across Maslow's hierarchy of need, but it's a framework of how people work and how like people just actually settle in and can live their lives. And when it comes to the reason I placed this up top when we're talking about data security is it's still a people problem. It's still a person that's driving on the other side of the command line. It's still someone else and their family and their needs that are making them make the decisions that they have done, to whether it's go out and try to make money on the internet. And if that's as a cyber criminal, they're still doing it for a specific reason. And figuring out what a person's needs in and what what a person's needs are and what their motivations are super important, both from a sales perspective as well as from a trying to identify and attribute how to go about security, is figuring out, well, who's attacking me and what do I need to be defending against? Well, what do they care about? That's why need is important first. CIA triad's a theme that will come up a lot. And in short, it's a framework, again, of the ways that you can view the data across your environment. Confidentiality being only the people that should have access to a message or information should be able to see it. You need to be able to keep messages secure. So in encoding and things of that nature. Integrity and availability are, of course, things where if you can't trust the data that you're seeing or you can't get access to it when you need it, it's not really that valuable. So all of these, depending on the type of organization, could be ordered in a different manner, but all of them are always important to every organization. So those are two common themes of what actually drives people and how do organizations actually view their data. And then data can be classified in a bunch of different ways, but in short, there's data that can be like restricted. No one has access to it except the very small specific list of people. Then there's like confidential and internal data. Then there's limited release and then public information. So there's a spectrum, and I'm sure organizations use slightly different terms, but being able to actually know what type of data you're dealing with is also really important. A vulnerability versus an exploit is a quick one of vulnerabilities exist and they have to be exploited. It's not the other way around. It's not, oh, there's an exploit out there and it's doing something just in a vacuum. Like there's a vulnerability that has to be exploited. The reason that's important to call out is people will talk about like post-exploit mitigation or how do you block a specific exploit. And back to the slide before, the answer typically is we'll patch whatever the vulnerable application is, get rid of that vulnerability. Of course, you can't do that all the time, but that is certainly a major theme in cybersecurity. Which brings a whole other industry of vulnerability and patch management. And I just want to throw the quick life cycle here of an overview of how a vulnerability gets detected and goes into a a disclosure, typically and hopefully a responsible disclosure to the actual vendor itself. But then there's a timeline, and then there's postings of that vulnerability to the public. And that's a typical process. All businesses follow that to some degree, and some are much better at it than others, but it is a process that exists. And whenever you see like Microsoft Patch Tuesday, they'll have their list of here are the bugs that were fixed, or bugs that were fixed, here are the vulnerabilities that were addressed in this patch. And this is a kind of a specific example that can be applied to any type of vulnerability that's found. There's a ton of other places of where we could begin. There's a couple of other themes that are very much in people's day-to-days in the cyber world. And then there's also even more that I just put a list of like what was on the top of my mind. And all of these are items that people are talking about every single day. We have 23 or so, or 25 SEs on our team. And in any given day, all of these bullets are details that people are looking for, ways to approach and have a better posture with their security practices around many of these different types of technologies. Obviously, some of these are ways to approach better security. Some are things that you need to secure better, but there's a lot that's going on out there. And I don't need to put too much on the slide, but more just to put it out there of there's so many tools that I'm still discovering all the time and every day. And it seems to be endless, but it's pretty awesome because a lot of it is open, community-driven stuff. So I mentioned the threat actors piece, but this is one where the reason that we're jumping into this type of background of who are the threat actors is, again, in order to secure your environment, you have to kind of have to know who you're securing it against. So when it comes to the different types of actors that are out there, there's a spectrum. It could be someone who accidentally clicks on a link. That's the common phishing email that we hear. And that's the, oh man, I didn't realize that like I had already signed up for Netflix and I didn't realize they needed my password, and you accidentally type your password in. Like that's an accidental phishing, social engineering based attack that maybe that insider or that insider's credentials can then be used, or a user accidentally makes changes or modifies access to a file and gives additional access where it otherwise shouldn't have been. Most important piece of the accidental is it's usually a mistake. It's usually something that could otherwise have been mitigated or addressed by other security controls. But going down the line here, there's malicious insiders who tend to be non-state, more disgruntled, typically in it for money. Hackers and hacktivists, opportunistic. Malicious insiders are also opportunistic to an extent as well. Cyber criminals, also opportunistic, meaning low-hanging fruit. They're going for the things that's going to get them the most money, easiest time to market. Get a bunch of spam emails out there. Send out 1 million emails. As long as 10 people click on it, then that is a way that they can still generate revenue. The last one is cyber terrorists or advanced persistent threats. This is one where it tends to be the area that people focus on most, but when it comes to things that people should be doing the fundamentals for, it's really to knock out all the top items here. If there's actually an advanced persistent threat that is targeting a specific organization, that is certainly a major problem, and it's not something that you can keep out. It's a much different approach if that is truly your adversary. But all the other adversaries are opportunistic, meaning you focus on the fundamentals and you focus on having good security controls, and you can really reduce your risks and make sure that you're in a much better place to be resilient if there is an issue. The graph on the right is just calling out that opportunistic to established is kind of the spectrum of how much effort is someone willing to put in. And someone who's opportunistic, like if you're walking down the street and you see a door that's wide open in someone's front yard, that is an opportunity. That is really low entry. Like all you have to do is walk up the driveway and walk into the front door and you're entering their house. That's an opportunistic example. More of an emerging example would be like, okay, someone's going to go walk up the front driveway. They're going to look to see if anyone's inside. They're going to jiggle the front handle. And if it's open, they'll go in. If the front door was not open, maybe they don't even check the back door. Maybe they just leave. That's kind of like emerging, like they have some established tools and techniques that they use, but they're not in it for the long haul. An advanced persistent threat is monitoring the house full time. They're not even there to try to break in. They're just keeping a log of everything and everyone who goes in and out when you take out the trash, whatever you're doing, and they can see inside the windows. Maybe they'll put a microphone inside too. That's an established advanced persistent threat. Like they're already inside. Very different than opportunistic. To call it a couple of recent or semi-recent and up to I think, I mean, the most recent event today was there's an issue with Okta. I haven't fully had a chance to break down what had been going on, but these are happening all the time. But I wanted to call out a few if you haven't seen these or if some of these look familiar. These are some of the most impactful events in cybersecurity, at least in my experience. Stuxnet was one that back in 2005, 2010 was kind of the development timeline. But the reason it was so impactful was it was a targeted attack targeting Siemens systems and the PLCs, or the monitoring computers for the Iranian nuclear centrifuges. And by targeting those monitoring systems and being able to make them malfunction, they were able to make the centrifuges destroy themselves. Not only did they do that, but they did it in an air-gapped environment, meaning they got a virus into an environment that didn't have a network wire. So they jumped an air gap. When I was like watching the documentaries and reading about that, I was like mind blown. Just an insane amount of time, energy, effort, and persistence to make that happen. The target breach is more of an example of social engineering, and some of the existing practices that we preach a lot of the times came up in the target breach. Namely, it was a social engineering attack. A phishing user clicked on a phishing email, not even a target user. It was a supplier for their HVAC system, I believe it was. And with those compromised credentials, they were able to move laterally in the environment, get to the POS systems, stole 40 million credit card records. And I believe the final count was between 1 and 3 million of those were sold on the dark web. So from that initial access, moving laterally, getting to POS systems, 40 million records were stolen. So quite a big impact there in 2013. Then there was the Shadow Brokers leak. That was over the course of a series of days. It was the leak that showed that the NSA was compiling a toolkit of previously unknown zero-day exploits. One of those that became the most popular was the Eternal Blue exploit, which was used in the WannaCry and Petya ransomware attacks. Very, very interesting stuff, especially when it comes to like how they leaked the exploits, the role the NSA was playing. When did that program start? Quite a history there. I won't even pretend to be the expert. It was more just things that really perked my interest and have driven me to really want to focus on cybersecurity, because these things are clearly not going away. SolarWinds, super interesting one, where the tool that SolarWinds had called Orion was a network monitoring tool. The software development lifecycle for that tool was compromised, and the ability to place a compromised patch into the software development lifecycle took place, meaning customers who had that legitimate tool pushed a patch from their legitimate SolarWinds resources and installed a compromised patch. That's another example of a supply chain attack, or I don't know if I mentioned it before, but supply chain attacks are certainly a major theme, and the trend has been getting closer and even more early on in the software development lifecycle from a security perspective to be able to catch those types of issues. Lastly, Log4j was one. If people had seen this one, it's kind of the top of the top of severity. It was a CVSS score of 10. It was a remote code execution vulnerability, meaning someone with running this library was vulnerable to an attack that would allow someone to execute whatever code they wanted remotely on their system. Not great. The thing that was also even more not great about this was just how widespread Log4j was. Being a logging library that's used in so many Java applications, and then not only the fact was it so commonly used, but it was so commonly used by teams that maybe they themselves weren't using it, but a service they had was using it. So really widespread, and quite an interesting problem to face, especially when teams are thinking, well, I don't even use this, but I have to be concerned about it and figure out how to secure myself. And then Okta was today. So just putting this together and finishing it last night, and I still am already out of date. So if that tells you anything. Any questions on that piece so far?
Familiar with the ICR that I was just reading about ICR Ukraine that was just set up to handle cyber attacks in the Ukraine war?
Is this for the current situation right now?
Yeah.
I'm not. I haven't followed or been up to date on that. Was that something that came out in the last couple of weeks, or?
Yeah, within the last week or so, the Ukraine is setting up a cyber basically an IT operating to help track cyber attacks against that are taking place as a result of the war.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably a good thing to see, and I hope that I hope it was more of an emphasis of, hey, we're doing this even more than we were before, and not like, hey, we're getting this started. But no, I haven't come across that yet.
I have to follow up maybe on that. Like, what type of cyber attacks could a country like Russia impose on Ukraine? What would you be worried about?
I think when it comes to like what we've seen so far, I believe it was either the Petya or not Petya that was ended up being attributed to a Ukrainian hacker. And I think that there's still a lot that can be done with like the hacker mentality and the small team. So it's easy and very much so a major concern of like the actual nation state actor. But I think that there's also a lot to be said of the damage that can be done by just like one disgruntled or motivated hacker. So I won't begin to attempt to kind of put the bookends of what could be possible, but I think some of the main pieces that I know there are a lot of concerns are around the industrial control systems, whether that's in America or in the Ukraine, and being able to make sure that those systems are as secure as possible, knowing that they're likely a main target. But yeah, I mean, I would say that the capabilities are certainly more in the persistent and very well funded, very knowledgeable and highly skilled. So anything is possible at that point.
I have another question. So it seems that you know the hacker mentality is coming up with new stuff yearly, every day, to kind of get at these systems, whether it's for our company or whatever. So how does VMware, as a cybersecurity company, try to stay 2 steps ahead of these people to try to make sure not only that they're covering their bases and what can be exposed to vulnerability that we know of, but also looking forward to say, hey, someone with X set of skills can probably use this, because it seems like there's always something new that can be exploited.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a great question. And part of the mentality that we take and have taken for quite a while at this point, since 2012, the mentality has been, if we know that adversaries have access to tools that can essentially be like remote shells into systems and have full access to a system, we need to literally be monitoring everything that happens on the network, everything that happens in the registry for Windows, everything that happens on the file system, and not like every single keystroke per se in a given situation, but need to know like when network connections are established and when they fail, when processes start and when they stop, if a registry key is added or modified or changed. Those are the types of values that, even if we don't know ahead of time what the attacker is doing, one example would be someone gets access to a system. The common situation is there's compromised credentials, say it's a phishing email, someone gets access to a system. If that user isn't a elevated privileged user, then the next step may be, okay, let's see if there are any connections to other accounts on the system, or let me try to move laterally and potentially try to get credentials that have more access. Those types of operations are the same types of operations that a system administrator are administrating. They're still doing those types of operations of, let me see like what network shares are associated, what user accounts are active on this system. Those are all things that when you boil them down, the behaviors themselves are trackable. And what that's turned into with cloud computing is our tools focus on monitoring everything that happens on the endpoint, abstracting down to those types of atomic type of operations. They're literally called the atomics from the MITRE attack framework. And I have a link that I can share with you guys. But the framework is essentially looking at, if we know that there are a bunch of these activities that, even if like you or I am sitting behind a keyboard and I do this operation, it still could provide some type of value for someone if it's not us behind the keyboard. But if it's us doing it, there's also value for it, meaning there is a need to have constant and consistent monitoring information that goes back to a centralized source, so that teams can actually look at, where was the first process? How did this actually kick off? All the way to, well, what was the end goal? What other modifications were made? What other changes were done to the system? So that's what we focus on, is initial access and post exploitation or post getting onto a box, what is going on once the adversary gets onto a machine. Because if you can figure out what they do when they get there, if they start doing like enumeration type of steps where they want to see the users, they want to see the network shares and things like that. Again, if it's Bob from IT, or if it's someone that you know on your team is just like trying to do some stuff for your team, that's fine. But if it's like an account that hasn't been active in 4 months, that, oh, we forgot to deactivate an account, like that's the type of thing where even though it's legitimate activity, the context makes it really, really important. Again, that pattern isn't something that people just have to look at raw. That's what the cloud processes. They look for those patterns. They look for the jumps of this process did this type of operation. We can tag that, enrich that type of process, and give that to a SOC analyst so that they say, hey, not only did PowerShell run, but it also did all these things associated with system enumeration, lateral movement, credential harvesting. All those things can be enriched into the process for security. And that's what we really focus on.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? And how are we doing on time too? I just want to be mindful because I know
About 5 minutes.
5 more.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can rip through a couple if you'd like, or if what would be best? Would it be best to just like kind of debrief and go to questions? Because I certainly don't want to like go over time if there's a hard stop.
No, there's not a hard stop, but about 5-10 minutes is fine.
Okay. So just to jump through a few and summarize a few of the misconceptions that are out there. There is a silver bullet. That's a misconception that people just want to be able to fix the problem very easily. People also think that they specifically are being targeted. And I know I've talked about some of these themes already, but it's not an easy solution. It is something that takes time and it can be complex. A lot of the times it's opportunistic, it's not targeted, and it's not going to go away. It's something that you do have to address, and teams are either facing that sooner or later, but we want to be proactive. And that's very much so the conversations we have is how do we help you be proactive faster? So none of these are real, but the best skill in IT still that I think is critical. Oh, I don't know if the audio is going through. Is that coming through? So I don't know if you guys could hear that, but literally turning it off and on again is still, I've already had 3 conversations today, not 3, 2, actually, where the conversation was, have you rebooted the device? Because that is still actually a critical part of the troubleshooting process. So if anything, IT 101 and the skills you're learning today and the simple stuff is still super beneficial. I did have a few others that I was going to go through, and it was more of a parody case study into Jurassic Park, but I know we're super short on time, so I don't want to necessarily start that and jump into it too, or get sliced off in the middle there. So Mark, I'll leave it up to you. I can rip through this quickly, or we can also stop and go through questions, whatever you think is best.
Let's take some questions, and we'll save the case study for your next appearance.
Okay.
Great. So you talked a lot about cybersecurity as a whole. In your experience, and you know, from what I read on you know, labor statistics and stuff, it seems that cybersecurity is only growing. And you know, I've talked to a professor here, you know, who works in information systems, and she said the same thing. So do you see that in your field, that cybersecurity as a whole is only going to grow as an industry and going to need more people, you know, daily?
Yes, for sure. It's definitely an area where there's so many new technologies that, again, are abstracted on old concepts that are either old concepts that have moved to the cloud or entirely new concepts that are built on projects that are less than 10 years old. So regardless, I don't see a way with just like the current people that are out there that all the problems could be solved. So from a trend perspective, it certainly is still going up in my mind.
I did miss a bit of the conversation, but I'll ask away. Were
Sure.
you able to talk about resources, or where you personally, like, what were the best resources for you when you first started in the industry as a whole, like coming from Bentley especially, which I know maybe as an undergraduate, you may not have a lot of cybersecurity background, so, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of it, and depending on the organization that you guys choose to work at and go that you choose after Bentley, a lot of the organizations out there have internal teams that are dedicated to a lot of these efforts, and they'll have their own internal security operations and network operations, and now cloud ops and DevOps. Like there's so many. So depending on where you go, there might be internal resources that are super helpful. So a lot of what I did when I was starting as an SE was reaching out to other sales engineers and other people on our team and being able to learn from them internally. But then there's also companies like Microsoft, VMware as a whole as well. And then I listed a couple other, I'll jump down to some of the other resources at the bottom here. Sorry.
Yeah, the screen share that stuff.
Oh, I broke it. Let's see if I can get it back. But yeah, the main piece that I would say from like a resource and learning perspective is there's so many tools that are out there that are free, and whether it's open source projects that are making security platforms or security tools and utilities for teams to leverage, or it's just people that are going through and doing walkthroughs and step-by-step instructions. Like there are just so many awesome people out there that like take so much of their time to provide those tools. So a lot of that is what I used. And if I can figure out how to use my computer, I'll get that page up and show you here. Zoom likes to do this thing where they like make you work for it way too hard. Okay, I think this is it. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I know I mentioned the atomic concept, meaning like the very, very specific type of a behavior. This framework, and I'll jump to it just because why not? The framework that we have up on the screen. Can you see both windows?
Now
Yep.
we can.
Okay, cool. So this is an example of one resource that's out there that's incredibly useful, the MITRE attack framework. It was originally designed as a detection framework for how to map and create a open and accessible repository for all security practitioners to look at the known tactics, techniques, and procedures that adversaries use. Even that is crazy and cool that they share it, but the amount of detail and the amount of energy and time and effort that they go through to update and add details to these from new and existing and emerging threats is bananas. So like if we click into one of these categories, we'll look at a category like persistence, and the stage of persistence, meaning how does an attacker get onto a system and find a way to make sure that either they can't get removed or they always have a way back. And persistence is a general category. One of that can be browser extensions. So if we click into browser extensions, you get a full breakdown of, well, what does MITRE mean by browser extensions? And then they have examples of it being used in the wild, examples of how to mitigate those threats in the wild, additional detection rules for people that are hunting for it in the wild. And that was just one page. And this page, to be honest, is probably one of the shorter ones. So MITRE is just like this ridiculous wealth of information. And part of what a lot of security tools do is they ingest this and they use it to enrich their data. So that's part of what we do is with our sensors, we take in the raw sensor data and we enrich it with something like MITRE. So very, very useful resource. This is one that's free. And I know that's kind of like a cop out of like the MITRE attack framework because it's so much, but tools like this are just invaluable. There's just so much information there.
Yeah. I'm just adding it right now to my thing, so yeah.
Yeah, no worries. There's a couple others, and I know they're like depending on the vendor, depending on like if it's a government organization, like there could be certain biases. But the NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, they write the definitions for a lot of this stuff, and CIS security or critical computer information security codes. I can't get the acronym right under pressure, but the CIS controls. Those are two frameworks that also drive a lot of other tools that are out there. So even just going back to the fundamentals, so kind of thinking like, how does a computer work with CS 240? These NIST and CIS frameworks are kind of like what's actually driving the decisions of these business leaders and these security leaders. And a lot of it's driven by the information in these frameworks. Also, I put a lot of other docs here of like different YouTube channels and a few of the podcasts, because I mean, quite honestly, like a lot of this is like conversations that you have as an SE are with security practitioners, and this is their life too. Like they are so passionate about it, and there's people that like they'll have nuggets about some article that they are reading or something that they're worried about, and they'll share that, and that's might spark something that you are interested in. So a lot of it is just kind of the daisy chain of like this leads to that, and these are just some of the catalysts that I found of good places to start. But yeah, I know it's there's no silver bullet for resources and learning post Bentley, but YouTube, these free open source projects, as well as some of the like more government framework organizations, like they do have really good documentation, really good information to get acclimated into. Is that something you really want to dive into and spend more time on, or is it just good to know about, kind of bag it up, categorize it, and like know that it exists, but not be like a full expert in it? Because that's still good to know it's out there.
Sir, I had a final question. No, not a final question, but a question. Is the majority of cybersecurity controls, like you mentioned, if someone leaves a company, like let's say their account isn't deactivated, that's like kind of a control kind of thing you can do to make sure that like if that happens, then their account gets deactivated so they can't access anything? Or is it mostly controls, or is it mostly like programs that might fight off like an attack from someone who's hacking in?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's funny you ask that, because I'll pull up this website and I'll go to the episode. This episode literally released yesterday or 2 days ago. The whole premise of this episode is a guy in IT gets let go from an organization and they don't decommission his account. And then 4 years later, he's able to log back into the domain admin account, and it wipes the entire organization remotely. So to your question, absolutely a major part of it, but it's just one part of it. So like the offboarding, and to be honest, I'm not really involved and hands-on with that type of process of offboarding an employee, but you're exactly right. Like making sure that there's secured and timely destruction of their data, decommissioning or disabling of their accounts. Like those are critical steps that teams miss, and it's partly because maybe they're just so busy just doing other things to keep operations going. But it is one of those things where this episode literally 2 days ago, 4 years later, his account was still there, password wasn't changed, and that was the vector. He was disgruntled, he went back in, and he was destructive. And that is definitely one of those where all it took was rotate the passwords, disable accounts, and that would have been mitigated.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
I have another question. So this is a bit removed away from cybersecurity, but from what you've shared, it seems the work is definitely, maybe not challenging, but not challenging to a point where you don't want to do it, but definitely a fun kind of challenge. But how do you find that VMware specifically allows you to kind of that kind of whole work-life balance thing, that obviously staring at a computer screen for 8 hours a day can be tiring? So have you found that in cybersecurity you can kind of step away from it and kind of live your own life aside from your position?
Sure. I guess to clarify, so I work in the security business unit of VMware Carbon Black, or VMware Carbon Black is part of the security business unit of VMware. So my day-to-day, I'm not like accessing our production instance from a security perspective. So it's not like I'm on a shift in a security operations center at all. So just to clarify, because that certainly is something that is a theme that I've heard and read as well. But overall, from a VMware perspective and being a SE and being SA, I mean, it is hard. There's definitely a lot. I mean, I think there's a lot of salespeople that are out there that are good, but there's also a lot of salespeople out there that aren't really salespeople for that long, and that's because it is difficult. It takes a lot of time. You might have to be doing things that, from a like enjoyment perspective, they might not be the most enjoyable things, but I think the trade-off is like, it's lucrative. I mean, sales is definitely a really good place to be from a monetary perspective, but it's also something that once you as a person are more confident to define the boundaries, I think that took me a couple of years to be better at it. So I don't think it was necessarily a VMware or Carbon Black thing. It was more of, I needed to just draw the line of when I was going to close my laptop, because there wasn't anything keeping the laptop open 95% of the time. It was just my mind saying, I need to be doing this. I need to be like learning something, or I need to be fixing something. But when I could be better about drawing that line, or once I started being better about drawing that line, I would say it took me like 3 years, 3.5 years to be a little bit better about that. So fair question though, especially from the cybersecurity side.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of this with us today, and for coming back.
Of course. Yeah, good to meet you all. Mark, I'm not sure if it would be beneficial. I could share this like the last slide, but the links of some of the resources if anyone is interested. But yeah, either way, I definitely appreciate all you guys sticking around for the afternoon.